I've been using the new M1 MacBook Air for about 2 weeks now, and I can say that it would definitely replace my 15-inch MacBook Pro. I purchased two different MacBooks, a cheaper one with 16GB of RAM and the most expensive of them with 8-core GPU and 2TB of SSD. I was used to recommending the MacBook Air only for students and people who didn't perform heavy tasks on the computer, but with the release of the Apple M1 processors, more advanced users will be able to choose the more affordable computers as well. Before we get started, don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So starting off with the design, the MacBook Air remains exactly the same as its predecessor. It is made of aluminum and it is thicker at one side while tuning to the other. It may seem that this detail doesn't make that much of a difference, but when you carry it around, it does give you a feeling of it being a thin device. One difference of the new model is that it no longer has the internal fan to help with cooling, which makes it 100% silent. And now, because the processor is more efficient, you probably won't have many overheating limitations. But if you use programs that demand a lot from your computer, it may be better to choose the Pro model. About the USB-C ports, we continue having only two on the left side and a headphone jack on the other side. It's worth noting that Apple says that the MacBook Air supports the Apple Pro Display XDR in 6K. However, and this is a big one, you won't probably be able to plug more than one external monitor to it. This seems to be a limitation of the Thunderbolt connection on the M1 chips, so you won't be able to connect more than one monitor to the MacBook Air. There are some ways around the situation, but you would need to buy some expensive adapters and use some software. In a few words, if you plan on using this MacBook with two or more monitors, you may want to reconsider. Talking about the keyboard, it has the scissor mechanism. I've already tested this type of keyboard when using my husband's 16-inch MacBook Pro, but my 15-inch MacBook Pro still had the butterfly mechanism. It's really quite a difference. The keys have more travel, which results in a better return when typing, and it responds really well. Something interesting is that some special function keys have also changed, and we now have the keys to activate Siri and Do Not Disturb. I still haven't used those keys enough to say if they will change my day-to-day life or not, and being quite honest, I use my MacBook plugged to a 32-inch monitor with external mouse and keyboard, so the new keys won't be something very significant for me, I would say. Now, when I need to carry my Mac out of my backpack or purse, for example, there is an accessory that is being essential to me, the Mujo MacBook Sleeve. It's made of felt and it has a vegetable leather flap, which makes it very comfortable to touch while having the elegant leather detail. Inside, it has two storage compartments that allow you to store the computer and other accessories. I also use a hard shell case on my MacBook, which ends up making it a little thicker, but I managed to put the computer in one compartment and the charger with the cable in the other one without having any issues. I think for those that need to take their computers to work or a meeting, this is a very practical and elegant solution. Check out all models and prices available on their website, mujo.com, and the link is also listed down below in the description. Now, since we talked about taking the computer to work or a meeting, something not so great is that Apple hasn't updated the MacBook Air's webcam to Full HD. The webcam is still at 720p. Now, as the M1 chips are more efficient, the new image processing also makes the quality better. It's not exactly what we wanted yet, but it was already a step in the right direction. The display also has white color P3 support, which gives you a greater variety of colors. If you wanted to work with photos or videos before the M1 Max release, your first option would have probably been the MacBook Pro because it has white color P3. Now, the only difference between both MacBooks display is that the Pro version goes up to 500 nits brightness and the Air goes only up to 400. I think most people won't really notice this 100 nits difference, but if you use your computer outdoors or in extremely bright places, the best option for you is still the MacBook Pro. Now, finally, the main MacBook upgrade, the M1 processor. This was an important change for Apple since they depended on Intel chips for years. In a few words, the new processors brought more speed, both for applications that depend on CPU and GPU, better performance, and also more battery life to the max. To test their performances, I will be comparing 3 different models: the M1 MacBook Air with 8-core CPU, 7-core GPU, and 16 GB of RAM, another M1 MacBook Air but now with 8-core GPU and 16 GB of RAM, and a 16-inch MacBook Pro with Intel i7 6-core 2.6 GHz processor, 4 GB AMD Radeon Pro 6300M GPU, and 16 GB of RAM. The cheapest M1 MacBook Air earned a single-core Geekbench 5 score of 1740 and a multi-core of 7632. The most expensive one had a similar result. It earned a single-core Geekbench 5 score of 1745 and a multi-core of 7617. What impressed me was that the MacBook Pro was left behind with a single-core score of 1065 and multi-core of 5452. Now, conducting the GPU Geekbench 5 tests, the cheaper MacBook Air earned a score of 17,112, the 8-core MacBook Air earned a score of 18,935, and the MacBook Pro earned a score of 25,2809. Here's where we can really see the difference between 7 and 8 cores. We cannot compare it to a dedicated video card as the one in the MacBook Pro, but I would say that the results are surprising considering that the M1 MacBook Air has integrated CPU, GPU, and RAM. Now, for the Cinebench multi-core CPU test, the 7-core MacBook Air earned a score of 6,589 points, the 8-core 6,970, and the Pro earned a score of 6,774. For single core, the cheapest version had a score of 1,491, the 8-core one earned a score of 1,492, and the 16-inch MacBook Pro earned a score of 1,109. What I can say is that the M1 processor is super efficient. Apple also said that the SSDs are faster, and in a quick comparison, the MacBook Air achieved around 2,900 megabytes per second read speed and 2,700 megabytes per second write. This is more or less the double if compared to the 2019 MacBook Air. Now, the 16-inch MacBook Pro had a slightly lower result with read speed of 2,700 megabytes per second and 2,600 megabytes per second write. Now, I'll be posting another video here on the channel running games on the M1 MacBook Air, but in a quick test playing Minecraft, both M1 MacBook Air versions came out very similar. The game ran constantly at about 60 frames per second with the graphics in one of the highest settings, and I've noticed a difference when increasing its settings to more than 12 chunks. But overall, I would say that Minecraft ran very smoothly in both MacBooks Air. It also ran smoothly in the 16-inch MacBook Pro, so if you were thinking about purchasing the Pro model because it can run games, you may now have a cheaper option to choose from. Talking about video editing in Final Cut, both MacBooks Air did really well and playback was fluid. The files were converted from Blackmagic RAW to H.264 since Final Cut doesn't accept BRAW. It took 2 minutes and 21 seconds for both of them to export the video, and it took 1 minute and 34 seconds for the MacBook Pro to complete the export. I will be shooting more tests regarding video exporting and editing other file formats, but for now, I am very pleased with their performance. In conclusion, I have to talk about the battery. Apple says the new models gain up to 6 hours more battery life if compared to the previous MacBook Air, and I can really tell the difference. My husband, for example, uses his computer to teach every Monday, and usually by the end of the day, the MacBook Pro is practically with no battery life remaining. The new MacBook Air, on the other hand, has more or less 60% of battery life remaining at the end of the day. It's really impressive. Well, I will post more videos with more tests here on the channel, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the new content. And if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.